Alright, so what I wanted to talk about first was the theory of it all, of printing, dodging and burning. So if we look at this image here, this is the inverted image. So that means that when we actually do print this image, it's going to be the opposite. So everything like, for instance, her sleeve and the background, it's really black here, but when that's printed, it's going to be your highlight. And it's going to be white. Everything that's really white in the projected image, like the bit under the brick and her dress, that's going to be really black when printed. You're going to look at this and it's going to help you decide what areas you'd like to dodge and what areas you'd like to burn. Because usually we'd be printing for, let's say, mid-tone, so greys, so things like flesh tone or detail on the brick here. So I know that if I print for the detail of her flesh and the brick, the highlighted areas are going to be blown out, so stuff like her sleeve and the background will be whiter. Just looking at the negative as it's projected will give you a good idea of what areas you'd like to dodge and what areas you'd like to burn. So we talked about analyzing the image, and now the next step is to make a test exposure, a test strip, to find the optimum exposure time to get our flesh tone. So the way we do that is the way I do it is I take a test strip, so you can see a thin strip of paper, I cover it with a piece of card and expose just part of it. Expose that for 5 seconds. Move that along, expose for another 5 seconds. Now, as you can see, 5 seconds, 10 seconds exposure. Now if we move that along and do it again, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and so on and so on. So I'd usually make five increments, 5 steps, to give me a good scope of the negative. But obviously you won't be exposing for 5 seconds each time. It depends on your negative. Maybe you do 2 seconds, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, or maybe you do more. It depends on your f-stop when you're enlarger, the enlarger itself, and the negative. So the next step will be to develop that test strip and then take a look at it. Okay, so now we've developed the test strip, and as you can see, the 5 second is not enough exposure there. So if we look at the rest of the strip, I can tell by looking at the strip that the best exposure time is probably 20 seconds, because this gives me the detail in the brick and the detail in her skin tone. So after you understand that and think, okay, so now it's 20 seconds I need to print for, but the highlight in the image, like her sleeve and the background, is still going to be burnt out. So that is where you would think about burning in more detail. So in this test strip it doesn't actually look that bad, but if you start using contrast filters, which you usually would, it's going to make the whites whiter and the blacks blacker. So that's going to mean I'm gonna lose more detail in her sleeve. So I'd probably think a lot about burning in her sleeve and also the background. So the next step will be to either make a print at 20 seconds and then assess it, or just go for it and print at 20 seconds and then try and burn in more detail for her sleeve. Okay, so before we get on to the burning, I want to talk a bit more about contrast filters, because contrast filters are really underrated, and I don't think a lot of people realize like how powerful they actually are. It's kind of the equivalent to using like levels or curves in Photoshop. Basically you've got grades ranging from 0 to 5. 5 is the hardest, where your whites will be the whitest and your blacks will be the blackest. and 0 being the lowest, so 0 hardly receiving any change at all really. But if you think with 5, it's kind of like crushing your image, so anything that is white is going to just blow out, anything that is black is going to really crush down and become really rich. So choosing your filter depends on a lot of things really. It depends on what your negative is like. For example, if your negative is already high contrast, maybe you don't need to use a high contrast filter. And then again, maybe you've got an underexposed image and maybe you need a high contrast filter in order to make your blacks black again and your whites white again. So it all depends on what you're doing really. It depends on subject matter too. You're doing a wedding photo and you've got a big wedding dress. Maybe you'd like to keep all the detail in the wedding dress, so you'd have to use a low contrast filter in order to do that. Or you could burn it in. And then on the other hand, maybe you've got a bride and she's got a really spotty face, so you need to blow out her flesh tones in order to remove the blemishes, so you do that by putting in a high contrast filter. It depends on what you want really. It depends on your aesthetic taste, I guess. Like some people like low contrast images, some people like high contrast images, and again it really depends on the picture. So the Ilford contrast filters come with a lens attachment that goes under the lens, and then you just put whatever filter you want in there. Okay, so now I want to talk about burning. In the last negative which we used, we've seen that her flesh tone and the brick was 20 seconds, so we needed to expose it for 20 seconds. But after that, after assessing it, we could see that the detail in her sleeve and the background would not be retained. So what we need to do is expose the whole thing for 20 seconds. So now we've got the detail and the brick and everything like that. And then I'm going to take my hand and then try and burn in more of the subject. But this is quite hard to control for smaller portions of the negative. So the best option, which I ended up using, is a piece of card with a hole in it. And now you can see the negative projected on the paper, and the bit with the paper ripped out is the bit that's going to be exposing, obviously. So you can see that now I'm just burning in that specific area to retain more detail. And you can see an example of the print. The first print is a high grade with no dodging or no burning. And then the second print is actually slightly longer exposure, but then again with burning with the piece of card, and you can see what difference it makes in your image.